So today we will build together a nice cinematic ambient drone concentrating on the VCO lab by Venom. This is the result. As you can see, we will do this completely from scratch. All I have here is the cable color key module from Inclan because I will use color coding. And I have here the stereo module from MindMeld just in case I need some control over the output level. Now let's start with the first layer. So we will use again the VCO lab. This VCO is really a playground for sound design and synthesis. And it's also polyphonic, which allows us to create multiple layers with just one module. So we will use the mix output. This will go already to the output. I will take it all the way up, and now we can mix a few different waveforms. We will start just with a simple triangle wave. Right, but we can add now more movement by using phase distortion. So let's see this step by step. If I right click the frequency button here, I can choose 0 Hz carrier. Now the VCO will not oscillate. It will have the frequency of 0 Hz. I can show you this also on the scope. Right, this is how it will look like. You can see there is no oscillation. But now we can drive its phase with another oscillator. So for example, I can use the VCO, the VCV VCO. This will be the signal that will read through the phase of the VCO lab. Right, so for example, we can use a sine wave to drive the phase of the whole mix, of the whole wave selection here. Right, so this will go to the phase input. Let me zoom in here also on the scope. Right, and now you can see we are scanning through this, right, and we get already a different shape. We scan through the waveform with a sine wave in this case. Right, we can make this even a bit more interesting by shaping the sine wave before it scans through the VCO. For this we can use another module from Venom. This one is called Reformation. Right, so I will just connect the sine wave through it first. Right, with this module we can shape the sine wave to different shapes and again affect the result. Right, you can see what we get here on the scope. Now I already have reformation set by default, but just make sure that you have the input. You can see input polarity bipolar and the output to bipolar, so it will work with bipolar audio signals. And now I would like this to be a drone in A instead of C. By default, most oscillators in VCV will be tuned to C. I would like this to be tuned to A and also to be at a lower pitch. Right, and this we can do again with the VCV VCO. This is now controlling the pitch of everything. Right, so if again I bring this up, if I right click the frequency knob here, I can enter all sorts of values, also note values. So if I enter A2 for example, this will be A2 octaves down. Right, and now we get an A at a lower frequency. Right, and this is the basic idea of this first layer, to use phase distortion. But again, let's try and make this a bit more interesting. So first of all, we can create copies of this VCO, again with the help of polyphony. So we can use, let's move everything here a bit. We can use another module from Venom. This one is called Poly Unison. Right, with it we can create copies of, in this case, the VCO and also detune them. So this will go to the volt per octave of the VCV VCO. Again, this will control the whole voice. We will go, let's say, with 8 copies, so 8 channels of polyphony. You can see now we have 8 channels of polyphony also from the VCO lab. The VCO lab is completely polyphonic, so also the CV inputs are polyphonic. Right, so now we have 8 channels, we have 8 copies of this chain, and we can start detuning them. So let me bring this in. Right, and now each copy is a bit detuned. Right, now again we have 8 channels. I would like this also to be spread in the stereo field. For this we can use a module from MindMeld. It's called the Bass Master Junior in this case, right? So I will connect this in stereo. Now we will have this only on the left, but if I right click it, we can change the poly input behavior to sum this to stereo. Right, so now we have 4 channels on the left, 4 channels on the right, right? This is spread in the stereo field. We can control the width also. Right, let's make it something like this. Now I would also like to detune the VCO lab itself. Right, so now if for example I take the frequency up or down, right, it will start oscillating very slowly, but still oscillating and will be detuned from the VCV VCO. So again, we can use this and add more movement if we use another unison module. Right, I will just duplicate this. And in this case, if I right click the range button here, I can choose between a few different options. If I go with 1 octave, we can detune this a bit more. Right, a bit more in a larger range. So again, this will go to the volt per octave. And let's start detuning this. Right, so now also the 8 copies of the VCO lab are a bit detuned. Right, and we have more movement. The sound is a bit more wider, it's moving. We have 8 channels of polyphony. Right, that we can also now, by the way, modulate per voice. So for this, we will use Volt's caudal. Right, it will look like this. Let me show you this also on the scope. Caudal will basically output smooth, random, or chaotic voltages. Right, and again, we can use for modulation. Now, as you can see, we need 8, right? We need 8 copies of this chaotic voltages because we have 8 channels of polyphony. So what we can do if we just connect a polyphonic signal, for example, from the poly unison here to the speed CV input, just connect it. We don't need to open even the attenuator. You can see we already turned caudal into a polyphonic module that will output 8 distinct modulation sources. And again, this will happen per output, which is quite amazing. Right, so again, we don't need the scope in this case. Let's bring back this voice and let's start by modulating reformation a bit. Again, this will shape the sine wave. Right, so let's do maybe 1, 2, and let's say this one. Right, and again, this will happen per voice. We have 8 different values, 8 different modulation sources, and this will be modulated per voice. We can also modulate the shape of the triangle on the VCO lab, again, polyphonically. We can modulate also the level of the square wave, for example, so it will come in and out, adding a bit more brightness here and there. Maybe also the saw wave. We can add also some instability to the VCV VCO by modulating its frequency via the FM input. Maybe I will make also caudal a bit slower here. Right, so if I send a copy or I send another output here, again, polyphonically to the FM input, and just open it quite a bit. Maybe something like this. Now also the 8 copies of the VCV VCO will be detuned a bit, will move up and down in pitch. Adds a bit of instability. And in this case I would like to use a filter, and again also polyphonically. So I will use the VCV VCF before the bass master, before we turn this into a stereo signal. Right, so now also the filter is polyphonic, and again we can modulate it per channel. Right, something like this. So again, we have 8 channels of polyphony with modulation per voice. Right, so this is more or less the first layer. I would like to have all in all 4 layers, so we need to mix them, and for this we will use the pressed duck from CV Funk. I will just connect this stereo. Right, we can mute this for a second. Right, this is a beautiful mixer from CV Funk that has also character control with feedback and compression all built in. Right, but for now, let's continue with the second layer. So the second layer will be again with the VCO lab. For this, we will use another interesting mode here. Again, right click on the frequency. And in this case, we will go with the gated audio one shot. Now in this mode, we can produce single cycle waves and control them again externally, which can also be quite interesting. So let's use again the mix output, right? Again, open it all the way. Again, let's use a triangle wave. Let's start with a triangle wave. We don't hear anything because again, we are not producing the signal cycle waves. We need also here an external signal or external source to drive this oscillator to trigger the one-shot cycles. And also for this, we will use the VCV VCO. In this case, let's tune this to A3. So again, I right-click the frequency, I enter A3, and now this is tuned to the note A3. Again, we want this drone to be an A. And now to trigger the single cycle waves, we can use the sync input on the VCO lab. Let me show you this again here on the mixer. We will use the square output from the VCV VCO and sync or send this to the sync input. Right, and here on the scope, you can see the result we are getting. Right, you can see we get a single cycle triangle wave in this case. Right, and again, we can change the timbre with the frequency control of the VCO lab. But since we are using the gated one-shot mode, right, the gated one-shot mode, also the pulse width of the square wave or the pulse wave will also have some control over the timbre. Right, so we have another place where we can change the timbre of this voice. So again, let's use polyphony to make this a bit thicker. We'll use another unison. I will duplicate the one I have here. Use this again for the VCV VCO. And also here, let's remove the scope. We will use again, maybe I will just duplicate this, the Bassmaster Junior to spread this also in the stereo field. Right, and this will be a stereo voice. Right, so already we get something a bit thicker. Right, now we can use another unison also to detune the VCO lab and get a different timbre per voice. So I will use this one here, duplicate it, send this to the volt per octave. Right, and in this case we can use even a larger range. We can go with 5 octaves. Right, something like this. So we have a different timbre per voice. And also here we will use caudal to modulate things. Right, caudal from volt. Again, we need just to connect a polyphonic signal to the speed input, and already it will turn to be polyphonic. We don't need to open any attenuator or anything. Just make this maybe a bit slower. And first of all, let's modulate the pulse width of the VCV VCO, just to have some movement. Also the frequency of the VCO lab via the exponential FM. Again, polyphonically. Maybe also here the shape of the triangle. Right, in this case, let's have the levels of the sine, square, and saw wave. Right, so the different waves will come in and out of the mix. And in this case, also the shape of the sine and the shape of the square, which is, again, pulse width modulation. Right, something like this. Now also here I would like to use a filter, but instead of a so-called normal filter, we will use the PEQ6 from Bog Audio. We make the connection. Again, we will use this polyphonically. Right, this is a filter bank that we can use to bring the voices in and out within each frequency band. Right, so if I take down the first two frequency bands, these are the lower bands, right? We have here 100 Hz and 175. We already have bass frequencies or lower frequencies from the first layer, so we don't need them. Right, but now we can modulate this also polyphonically, and for this we will use the quad LFO from Surge XT. I have it already set to smooth random voltage, but the CV inputs here of the PEQ6 will work with unipolar signals. So we can just click the windows and choose unipolar. Right, so we have voltage that goes from 0 to 10, right, and this will work better with the CV inputs. Also this we can set to polyphony or to polyphonic modulation. In the right click menu we can choose how many channels. If we go with 8, now each output will have basically 8 different signals. Right, so let's modulate the levels of the 4 bands, take the attenuators in this case all the way up. Maybe also faster modulation. Right, something like this. And again, this is polyphonic, so we have 8 different channels of different modulation. Right, so we have some movement. Now I would also like to make this a bit more crunchy, so we can send this through a reverb and then a distortion. For this we will use Galaxy from Sapphire, which is a beautiful reverb, and the Surge XT distortion. Right, again, this will go, in this case not polyphonically, this will go after the bass master, so in stereo this will go to the reverb, to the distortion. Let's have a bigger size, more detune on the reverb. Add some mix, and then add drive and feedback. Right, so it's a bit more crunchy, and now we can mix it in with the first layer. So I will take the level all the way down, unmute the first layer, and then bring it up slowly. Right, something like this. So we have now another layer, a bit more crunchy, a bit brighter. And let's add another layer. In this case it will be with the Surge XT Nimbus. Right, this is another version or clone of Mutable Instruments Clouds, but it's also polyphonic, including the CV inputs. Also the CV inputs are polyphonic, so again, each voice can have a different settings. Now, as the source for this process, right, we will use the bass voice, the polyphonic, or the first layer, the polyphonic output here from the filter. Again, we want to do this polyphonically. In the right-click menu of Nimbus, we can change this also to process things polyphonically, polyphonic stereo processing. And now this will go to the mixer. Let's also solo this for a second, right? So now we hear just the output from Nimbus. Now again, we do this in parallel. We have already the dry signal. So let's take the mix all the way up. And actually, before we go to the mixer, let's use another, and you know what? I will just duplicate it. Another Bassmaster Junior, just so it's a bit spread in the stereo field, right? So now we just need one output instead of left and right. We just use the left, right? And this will go to the bass master. And again, this will spread the voices in the stereo field. So now we can add, we can add some density to start generating grains. Take the quality all the way down to 16K 8-bit, and again mono in this case. We don't need stereo because the Bassmaster will turn everything stereo for us. Let's take the pitch here up an octave. This is by semitones, so if we take this up by 12 semitones, This will be an octave up. Now we will use another quad LFO, again from Surge XT. Again, let's set this to be polyphonic with 8 channels. And now we can start modulating things polyphonically. Right, so let's, for example, modulate the grain size. And also the position. And again, this will be per voice. Also the density, so some voices will have more, some voices will have less. And also the texture, which will make things a bit more blurry. Now if we take the feedback up on Nimbus, we will get a sort of a shimmer effect because the octaves will just keep on going up. Right, something like this. And again, let's mix this with the other layers. So again, level all the way down, unmute the first layers. Bring this in. And now before we start processing the whole mix, I would like to add also a sub-bass, a sub-bass even. This will be with a Sine VCO from Borg Audio. I will set it up to be A1, so it's really low in frequency. Again, right click, A1, right, this is 55 Hz, which is quite low. I hope you have subs or a good set of headphones. Again, level all the way down at first and let's mix it in. Oh yes, it's there. It's definitely there, very nice. And now we can add some compression and feedback on the mixer itself to bring everything up and to make everything a bit more crunchy. Oh yeah. Right, something like this. This now becomes one voice instead of 4 distinct layers. We have one huge voice now. And of course I left the reverb for the end result. So now let's add a nice filter and lots of reverb. And we will do this with the Surge XT filter and of course plateau. So let's connect this. The filter is there just to add again a bit movement, so everything is moving all the time. Before I add the reverb, let's just add some modulation here to the filter. We can do this with walk, also Borg Audio, also chaotic random voltages. Right, something like this again, just for the movement. And now let's take the size of the reverb a bit up, more decay, less lows, no need so much for the lows. And let's bring it in. Oh yes. So we get a nice big cinematic drone that we can use in all sorts of ways. Of course, you can tune it also to a different note. You can use this as a background for other voices and layers. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Cheers.